growing exponentially in terms of speakers wanting to provide content, and then also the attendance. We actually sold out in last week of January, and the wait list is up to 109 right now.
It's not a bad problem to have, though.
It's really not. It's kind of forcing us to think about some new options. So we're kind of taking that to the table right now. We actually put up a survey a couple of weeks ago to see how people would feel about potentially having a second summit later in the year. And we got something like 120 some odd submissions for that. So
yeah, mine would have been one of them.
Oh,
I saw that. I did put it. Oh, awesome. Looks like we're live now. Are you testing us out, John?
Yeah, we're live now.
All right.
But yeah, we're testing. Have you heard from Michael yet?
Yeah, he is online. I've spoken to him. I did bring him into the channel, into the chat.
Yeah, he did a quick reply.
I'm down a monitor today. I managed to break the end off my HDMI cable, and I don't have a spare. So I was actually had the desktop case turned sideways, and I didn't realize how short the cable was. So when I turned it sideways, it bent the end of the HDMI connector.
Oh.
Hello.
Can't hear you yet.
Oh no.
Now I can.
Okay. I was probably standing on my button.
Yeah, you may need to increase your volume.
Gains?
Your gain, okay. Yeah.
How's that? Any better?
Much.
Yeah.
Yeah, you sound great.
Are we broadcasting video on this too?
Yes, we are.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, we're live on YouTube right now.
Cool.
So I should probably remember to start recording the audio or I'm going to have a very bad day later.
Yeah, I'm sure people don't want 30 minutes of flapping heads.
I definitely don't want to hear us talking a minute late.
Okay, now the audio is recording. And it looks like I've got decent waveforms. Ryan, are you in the YouTube channel? So can you see the chat? I may need to rely on you because I'm down to like 1.5 screens.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is there a chat room?
Yeah, so there is. We have had people in chat on
PowerShell Slack.
On the streaming channel in the PowerShell Slack is what we've traditionally used, and we've also got people who are chiming in on YouTube.
Yeah, I just
already, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So, and as Will said, this is probably one of the biggest mugs going.
That's pretty legit.
And it's full to the brim with coffee because it's 2 a.m. UK time. Once again.
I had a huge Microsoft one.
I feel like
down
I
on
should have brought
campus.
a Canadian mug for it so I could, also represent the Commonwealth here.
Got rid of the dog.
Oh, I thought maybe you were going to get a competing coffee mug.
Coffee.
You think that's a mug?
Yeah.
When do you get a load of this?
That's not it.
Glenn Sarty, nice mug, Ryan. Rule Britannia.
So cool, Bob. I'm up for this because I don't sleep. Have you not noticed this by now? The amount of times that I'm online till 5 a.m. at the weekend.
Oh, to be young and have all that energy.
No, it's just I don't sleep well.
So we may catch you streaming live on Twitch, coding at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, maybe in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be looking at doing a deconstruction of PowerShell Get.
Ah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So are we ready to officially start? On time? Wow. That's kind of weird.
Hey, Francois.
Hey.
Wow. We've already got people from halfway around the world watching us. That's pretty cool.
So we've got Glenn from down under. We've then got obviously myself in the UK and a few others I can see sort of in my area.
We follow the sun.
Maybe.
Okay, so let's get started. Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we are very pleased to have with us Will Anderson and Michael Greene. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you.
So if I remember correctly, you have both been on before. Is that correct? I know for sure Michael has. So you've been on, haven't you, Will?
I have not, actually.
Wow.
I
Okay.
think we've tried to connect in the past and schedules and all those things.
Yeah, I've definitely talked to you at conferences and things like that before. So
Yeah.
welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
So why don't you go first and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So first and foremost, I'm the newly minted CEO of the DevOps Collective. And
Right on.
So we run the PowerShell and DevOps Global Summit, which is coming up this April. I'm not panicking at all. No pressure. But yeah, so that's my primary function. I'm also an independent contractor. I do consulting on automation, cloud solutions, and app modernization. So that's a little bit about me.
And Michael, you are of course from Microsoft, but I don't know what your current position is.
Yeah, I'm in charge of the configuration management strategy in Azure. So for everybody who's on the call that's familiar with a more technical representation of that, DSC as a language, DSC as an extension, as a service, all the places that DSC fits into, including Windows Server, and the new parts where DSC is starting to show up, which we can talk about tonight, called Azure Guest Configuration.
Ooh, that sounds very cool. So the last time I used DSC, I've never used DSC, whatever the new version, if there is a new version in PowerShell 6 of DSC. But I dug up a configuration that I wrote like a year and a half ago because I had a couple of new servers, 4 new servers to add to an infrastructure, ran that thing and, to configure my servers. But I know that DSC has changed a lot since I really had dug into it. I mean, at the last time that I was looking at it, it wasn't even a service. It was like some kind of WMI thing that was running on some kind of schedule and reading the file locally and, doing some weird stuff. So where's DSC, where does it come from? What do people use it for? First of all, because people may not be even familiar with DSC. And what's new?
Right on. DSC, let's just define it. DSC is the ability, it's a feature of PowerShell. We can start there. And as a language abstraction, you don't have to use PowerShell, but it's 99.9% of the use case. And the idea is you're just going to declare an end state for a server. So the configuration should be simple, easy to read, especially in source control. It's not unlike an answer file. And then behind the scenes, it's just very well organized PowerShell scripts that are doing all the heavy lifting. And the idea is that the experts in your organization are going to collaborate on the how things should happen, and you're just going to describe what should happen. So if you're going to deploy a server and you want to say it should have a web server feature turned on, then you say, Windows feature, web server, ensure present, and it'll take care of the rest for you. So over the last couple of years, the community around DSC has been absolutely awesome. There's just shy, last time I checked, which was a couple of weeks ago, I think, we were closing in on 1,400 resources, all for Windows. We don't have much representation for Linux, other than the what's built in that kind of shipped with that solution originally.
And for Windows, just to clarify real quick, just DSC, for anybody who doesn't know, stands for desired state configuration. And do you want to define what a resource is in your DSC configuration file? What do you use a resource for?
A resource is a construct of a Windows feature. It could be a file somewhere. It could be a registry key.
I'm sorry,
it's
Michael.
Anything like a setting.
We just had an audio issue. Can you say that again?
Sorry. It's anything. Think about it like a setting in an operating system. A registry key, a file, a feature, anything that you would like to configure inside of an operating system. And if you go back to the origin of DSC, the construct of deploying servers into a cloud environment was not brand new, but it was emerging. And Linux already worked really well for this. And so for people like Chef and Puppet, Salt, and all of the different tools at the time, they were just managing the settings for a Linux box getting deployed into the cloud so easily because all the configuration is just flat text files. And so at the time, the idea was, well, what would it take to define the configuration of Windows in a text file? Well, it's extremely API oriented. So have the registry, and you have WMI, and you have IIS, different methods of configuration using XML and commandlets, Active Directory. I mean, there's like everything has its own interface. So that's where this solution kind of came into play. That okay, well, let's just have a very well organized set of scripts that talk to those interfaces, and then the configuration files will just be your flat text files. And we were not we at the time; it was before I came along. Wise, in my opinion, to make it very easily extensible in that anybody could come along and use those. So right now, if you're using Chef, if you're using Puppet, if you're using Ansible, if you're using Salt, you can use any of those DSC resources I mentioned that are in the PowerShell gallery without having to really learn too much about DSC. So that what the community has invested with their time and effort can really be used across any configuration management tool.
That's very cool. So how does it work?
So you've got a set of commandlets so DSC is built into Windows. I want to say 2008 or 2012 might have been the first place where it landed in Windows. And if you look in System32/configuration, then you'll see where it's at, and you'll see the details there. So you define what you want as code. So you can think about configuration as a keyword, similar to saying function. So you say configuration and then name, and then open bracket. Call out what resource you want. So if it's registry, it's going to be registry. Give that a name so now you have type and then name. And then within those brackets, either within ISE or within VS Code, you'll get IntelliSense, and it'll help you with the authoring. So you can figure out exactly what your property value combinations should be. When you run that script, it creates a MOF file, it's Managed Object Framework, which is not terrible to read as a human being, but better for computers. So that's why PowerShell creates this nice language abstraction for it. But once that's supplied to the machine, either using commandlets, you can just put it in the right folder in Windows. We've got a variety of services that can apply it. It'll put the machine in the correct state, which is really the magic. Like the whole idea is now you've got something really simple that you can put in source control, and you can and anybody can come along and there's like this classic problem, right? Of the service is out. Well, what changed? And that's always like the big post-mortem discussion. It was working fine on Friday. Why did it break on Saturday? Who changed what? And being able to go back to source control and look at what commits came in and the comments that were associated with it and who made those commits is a really big deal when it comes to managing configuration of servers. So I would say, this is true for any configuration management tool. The ecosystem around it is just as important as the tool itself. So for the PowerShell ecosystem, that's a build service, like pick your favorite build service. Obviously, if it supports running PowerShell, that's a win. And then Pester, potentially OVF for integration testing. We've had several great blog posts out there that kind of go through all the different ecosystem of tools that kind of wrap this whole scenario. And that's been subjects for a lot of great talks at PowerShell summits and PSConfs, and it's been growing for a long time. So where we're at now, last spring, I went and presented at PowerShell Summit and then PSConf about how we're going to reboot DSC and make the engine itself open source. And then I came back and there was a big conversation that's like, well, we're making some pretty big bets into how this is going to be used in Azure, not just as a feature, but as part of Azure, and where we want to go from here. And if we're going to deliver all of that, we can't also open source the engine, because we don't just want to share code. We want to have a well managed project with where we're being reactive to pull requests and actually responding to issues and not just letting things get stale. So we've still got that on hold from that time forward, but we have sort of rebooted DSC into this platform called Azure Guest Configuration. And so right now we are a part of Azure. I should say, by the way, that so we've rewritten the DSC engine as this small executable written in C++ that compiles both for Windows and for Linux. It's in use across a handful of Azure services already, but the core focus right now is bringing this experience to Azure Policy. So right now, by the way, Azure Policy is like rules that you can set around the cloud.
Azure Policy is awesome.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's really, really popular. The idea is like maybe Ryan is like the custodian of our organization's subscriptions, like cloud subscriptions, and Will is a developer. And Ryan wants to enable Will to move as fast as he can, but he's just a little suspicious of what Will might do if he doesn't have guardrails.
Yeah, probably for the better, eh, Will?
Will can do some pretty shady stuff sometimes.
So Ryan can set rules like, yeah, go ahead, consume as much as you need, but you can't deploy servers outside of North America, and you can't have public endpoints until we talk again, and that kind of stuff, right?
Well, you're not having any M18s, M16s,
right? That's actually so Ryan has a good point. There are some things in the cloud that are super expensive, and if that's part of your plan, great. But you don't want to have a whoops that's like a $10,000 whoops. You want to have like the small whoops that are controlled and easily corrected. So yeah, policy helps set guardrails for that. So we're the first engineering team to extend policy and look inside the VM and audit what's going on, and then surface that back up so ARM can report on it. And we are doing all of that using DSC. So right now, it's just built-in policy. So you can go into policy and say, I need to make sure an application is present across all of my VMs or not present. And we've got a bunch more coming. That's all DSC behind the hood. And for Linux machines, we're using Chef Inspec. And it's still DSC doing the plumbing, but no one actually interacts with it at that level. And just think about it like data plane type standard ways of moving traffic around. So I'll kind of give you a little roadmap. I'm super, super transparent as a PM. Our next step will be to allow people to author their own content. That'll be the first time in a couple of years, really, that we've introduced a whole new surface area for the DSC community to take their existing skill set and things they've written and take it into a whole new area of compliance. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then at the end of this spring, we will begin work on also doing enforcement. So right now, you can think about it like this way for audit. DSC has get, set, test. So test, see if this machine's in the right state. If it's not in the right state, fine, run set, and that puts it in the right state. And get was like not really used that much for the first version of DSC. It was like this, like once in a while, you might go run it to make sure it still works kind of thing.
So many configurations with empty hash tables.
Completely, yeah. So the idea of get was what state are you in now? And then test was just true, false, you're in the right state. And then set is like what everybody cared about. It's doing the work. So for audit, we run test. And if test fails, we run get, which is different. But it means for reporting, are you in the right state? Yes, no, you're not in the right state? Okay, what state are you in? Because we want to report on that. So at the end of this spring, we'll start work on set, which will mean we also have enforcement. And at that point, we will have the new LCM, completely into a place where everybody can take full advantage of it.
Can you explain the LCM? Sorry.
Yeah. No, LCM is Local Configuration Manager. So that's just a fancy way of saying the engine for DSC. We are working on a solution that would allow people to use the new engine outside of Azure. So I can't, that's one, we will be able to talk about it at Summit, but I'd have to have my boss here if I wanted to talk about it now.
So you're saying that the state that you're talking about, the first stage of this is going to be you're only doing the configuration through an Azure tool that is creating a configuration behind the scenes and applying it to your Azure resources. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And then eventually you will be able to, I'm assuming, make the same type of configuration, whatever the interface looks like in Azure when I set up my configuration, and apply that configuration to my on-prem machines as well, somehow.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And actually, I really like the way it's organized now. So two things. There's always been this discussion about how do you manage multiple configurations? And in the current DSC, there's partial configurations and composite resources, and it gets pretty complicated.
It's pretty messy.
It does.
It does get really, really messy.
And it makes testing really difficult.
And just to give people a feel for what that might look like, you might have a team like your IAS team that manages your web servers, and they may have a DSC configuration that they want applied to all of the web servers. And then maybe you have another team that manages your storage configuration or some other configuration, your backups, and then they have policies that they want to apply. And there's a way with DSC to take those policies and kind of munge them together to apply that configuration to a machine as a whole without the separate, with keeping the configurations themselves separate. So that's what we're talking about, just to be clear.
You've got it exactly. And what's really notorious. So if we once again use Ryan and Will, so Will manages an application that's like the storefront. And then Ryan says, hey, there's a new vulnerability. Let's get that closed for all of our machines. But Ryan doesn't give Will a chance to test that change. He just rolls it straight into production. And then there's an outage. And then they just point their fingers at each other.
Good job, Ryan.
Yeah.
I'd never do that. I'd never do that.
Twice. I'd never do that twice.
I do it once and learn from it.
So actually, a lot of the Azure RBAC, just role-based access control, helps us to at least give customers control to where if they want to avoid that scenario, they can. But there's a couple of things that make this much prettier. One is this new agent, you think about it this way, everything coming at it is just a solution. So it's I want to inventory this machine. Well, that's mostly a get operation. So let's just take what I need to know to collect information and put that in a subfolder. And then any modules I need to help with that, put that in the same subfolder. Now I can just easily add and remove these solutions. They're just basically subfolders. If you also want me to audit, that's fine. If you want me to set, that's fine. So I don't have to worry about conflicting dependencies. I just have these different solutions that come in, and it's managing the execution of all these things. And then the other thing that I really like, so right now in Azure, we have an extension and a service. And the extension is a way for the VM to get configured, including configure the VM to talk to the service. And then the service provides reporting. But the service is fairly complicated, and the extension is really simple. So what we've done with the new platform, and I really like this, the extension is actually even simpler. You literally just turn it on. And then rather than having to worry about adding all of your dependencies into an artifact store and registering and things like that, think about it this way. So a year ago or so, I was actually asking a ton of people, what if we just took configuration and made it part of ARM templates? And the feedback was almost 100%. That'd be way too much. I can't take every setting from Windows and Linux and put them in JSON as part of my cloud template. That's not going to make sense. So just keep it as a separate artifact. Okay, cool. Well, what if we brought scenarios into your cloud template? So you just say, I want a VM, and then you say, I want it to be a web server, or I want it to be a domain controller, or I want it to use my security baseline, or I want to make sure it has some antivirus solution, and just represent those as an assignment, just as a scenario that you express in your cloud template. And of course, that gets linked back to something that looks exactly like an extension package. I mean, it's just the configuration and the dependencies it needs. And then that service, when the extension lights up, it queries the service and says, what am I supposed to do? And, I got these assignments for you. Great. I'll let you know how it turns out. And it just does constant reporting. So the whole thing is much cleaner, much simpler, much easier to put into cloud templates, easy to test. I mean, I really like the new design, and we've had really good both scalability and reliability out of it so far. So if you can't tell, I'm super, super excited about where we're going. The only thing that would make it better is if it would have been more visible over the last year, but we're finally getting to the point now where it's coming to the surface. So I'm pretty excited about that.
So in the future, does that mean that you're essentially going to need to have an Azure subscription to use DSC?
That's where we'll land first.
Okay.
We've got a few opportunities on the table for like also using this code base outside of Azure. I'm not sure where that's going to land yet. Sure. Like, this is how planning always goes. Every 6 months you take all of the ideas and all of your aspirations and you go into a room and, you were hoping for 15. Actually, the way it works is you start off, you're hoping for like 10. And then somehow when you leave that room, you've been talked down to 6. And then you've got a hard decision to make because you're only really going to get 3. And it's just a brutal process, but that's how it always works out. That's just engineering prioritization. So, we'll see how things turn out.
I think one of the benefits, though, if you do everything Azure first, you can then bring it back on-prem and use what you've learned from running this at scale.
Yeah.
For people running in their own data centers. And obviously, people can make use of Azure Stack. So, yeah, is this something that will come to Azure Stack in future?
Yeah, initially it'll probably look like we'll treat the VMs running on Azure Stack as a VM that's running anywhere that's physically located somewhere that needs to be talking out to the service. But long term, we've got conversations going on to figure out how we take this new code base and actually make it part of the Azure Stack fabric as well.
Okay, so we've got a question come through Slack from Glenn. So you've talked about quite a lot of stuff. What are you most excited to release and see the community's response?
The custom content, because this is the first time that we will. So when I think about the opportunities, my mind constantly goes back to 2 things: people's time and people's skill. So for people who have been thinking for the past few years and about how they're going to use DSC in the future, both for their organization and how, as a career path, like every hour spent learning a new skill, you're like making a bet that skill is going to take you somewhere. So as we open the door to using this custom content, it will literally mean let's take that skill into a new area. And I'm super, super excited about that, which Azure policy brings us into the compliance area. So now we'll be able to cover both configuration management and compliance. Also, how should I put this? Once we fully support custom, the gloves really, really come off and we can explore a whole bunch of interesting areas because it's not just things that we're publishing. So once we've given the community the opportunity to be makers, they always come up with like a million new awesome ideas that we never even thought of. And that gets really exciting. And it is the way we've constructed this new solution, it's a highly extensible platform, but still grounded in DSC. So it's easy to extend. So I'm really excited to see like what new ideas come up. And as part of that, by the way, So like every 6 months I do a blog post, like what's new and what's going on with DSC. I've been holding off for like a couple of weeks. I usually do it in January. I'm just waiting for a handful of final things to fall into place. So I'll just say that, so for the DSC community that works on resources and publishing things, you saw like we had Johan last summer, which was awesome. Like we had a full-time person just like helping with the community effort. We are bringing another person in this spring to fill that role, and we will once again have very good attention to working with the community. I can't say who it is yet, but it's somebody who's really active in the community. Okay. So I'll just like leave it there.
We'll look forward to that when it comes. We've got another question, and this time come from YouTube from Mark Krause, who you know is ex-MVP and is now at LinkedIn. So he's asking, is there going to be an outbound concatenator service for this, or does this all require direct internet egress from each node?
I think it's concentrator service.
Yeah, exactly. So the way that I like to answer this is always like, well, it doesn't have to have air quotes internet access. Like it doesn't have to talk to the whole internet. We can constrict down to a namespace or IP ranges, and even so we can. What we're working on is basically think about it like regional areas where you can say, I want to make sure that I'm talking to this endpoint in my region and things like that. So it has to be able to talk to Azure one way or another, whether it's through a proxy, through, like you said, some sort of a traffic concentration solution, whether it's a proxy device or just a good routing scheme. It has to have some way to talk to Azure.
So is this something that I don't know whether will get added to virtual network service endpoints as a possibility?
We will start with service tags, which just makes authoring security rules in Azure a whole lot simpler, because you don't have to actually specify IP ranges and things like that. You just say what service you want to talk to, and it takes care of it. And then, we want to look at what are the ways that if you've got a completely private network, we can still let you talk to it without having to open it to the rest of Azure.
Now, traditionally, we've thought of DSC as being either in a push mode or a pull mode. Does this have a mode? Is there a different way of thinking about it now, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a little bit different way of thinking about it. So the new engine, traditionally you would use the commandlets as that push, which is like push. I think the most popular push is actually local on the machine. So you're not really pushing the network, you're just applying it locally, but you can push it to the network. And then pull is where you tell it, I want to connect to a service and pull things down. This is predominantly pull, although I've heard people describe this type of scenario as like push to pull. So you might have like multiple things that you want it to go get, and you're just telling, you're just telling something like, make this a domain controller. Here's where the domain controller stuff is. Here's where you're going to find it, right? Become a domain controller. So you're sort of like pushing the instructions, and then it's pulling all the dependencies that it needs to do its work. So it's almost like a blend. Yeah.
So that could be initiated from either side then? I could initiate it from the machine to issue the commands that say, hey, make this a domain controller, or issue those commands from Azure?
You would almost always issue the command from Azure.
Okay.
So right now, we don't have commandlets for the engine yet. It's just a REST interface that communicates with it. So there really, not that you couldn't script your way around it, but there really isn't a good way to do like a true push the way we've thought about in the past. It's more like you're pushing the instructions.
Okay. And I know that kind of the DSC pull server type of thing that has been in Azure before has been part of Azure Automation. I assume this is completely broken off and separate from Azure Automation, or is that not the case?
Yeah, it is separate. And like we will have to have some way that we think about how to move customers from one to the other. This spring, like one of my big jobs is to go ask a bunch of people, what do you want out of the enforcement scenario? And then like one of the things we'll have to think about it is, okay, well, if you're doing enforcement from Azure Automation State Configuration, which is like the DSC service now, how will you like get yourself from one to the other? And I've already written, a bunch of scripts for exporting and things like that. So I think it is very doable. We just have to figure out a plan. And then like in the cloud, things just don't really ever go away. So I'm not saying never, but like if as long as you have, you can still get like there's still classic VMs around. So as long as you have people who are depending on you, you continue to support the existing things. So
is pricing
it definitely won't be a flip.
Is pricing something that you can talk about yet?
So for policy, it's just part of Azure. It's, if you've got VMs and you're just able to consume that. And for DSC, both for the extension and for the service in Azure, that's already just part of Azure. I don't think that the outside of Azure pricing is locked in yet, so I probably shouldn't speculate. I know what we want to do, and then we'll see.
Because I know at least when we had looked at using Azure as a as a pull server, the price per node was prohibitively expensive for the number of servers that we had.
Yep. Well, they eventually wound up fixing that.
Oh, they did.
I remember having that discussion, and they were able to knock it down by compute hours. So how often the LCM checked into the pull server.
Oh, nice.
So if you only had to do it like twice a day, it was like 2 compute hours or whatever. Yeah. So it went from that $6 per month per node to variable, but you could go as little as 50 cents. I distinctly remember that conversation going on because I remember initially we were looking at it and it's like, oh, it's free to use. This is great. And then we got the quotes in with the final pricing and it was like, how much to implement in this data center? $7 million a year. Okay, we're not going to do that. So, it was...
that's only small change, Will.
Yeah, when I have Fortune 500 level executives turn pale in an instant, you know you've made an impact with your pricing.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of money to have to be able to say, I can show $7 million worth of value from being able to apply these configurations to my servers.
I can buy a lot of button pushers for $7 million.
I have literally heard that argument. Yeah. The thinking is it's kind of like System Center. Like there's a suite of things that falls under that $6. But if what you wanted and you weren't ready to use anything else was configuration management, then that's a hefty price tag. But Will's got it exactly. You can throttle that back. Also, I would say, like, have your licensing person email me, and I will escalate to the business, and we'll try to figure out something better. Because obviously, we want to have as many people as we can. So,
but they should probably wait till the new offering, right?
Yeah, I don't. So here's the other thing: is you could use policy to drive DSC from existing extensions too. Like you could say, and the CAT team is looking at this now, but like you could apply a policy that says audit for VMs that aren't using the extension to conform to the baseline. Like if you care about CIS or STIG or something like that, you could just say use the extension to apply those settings and audit for VMs that are not doing it, or even deny deployments that don't have that and provide an error message that makes sense as to why your deployment's being denied. So CAT team is, well, it depends on which CAT team you're on, what the acronym means. It's usually like customer advisory team or customer architectures and technologies. You can think about it like the customer facing side of engineering that's going to go spend time with customers that are like using the latest things or things that haven't come out yet and doing the first deployment with the thing, and then see what worked, what didn't work, come back to engineering and say, hey, your stuff is broken, fix it. And it's cool. I spent 4 years in the Windows Server CAT team, and that's how I ended up as part of the PowerShell team. I was the PowerShell CAT guy for a while.
So Ryan, I know that you didn't want to have Will on to talk about DSC. So maybe we should switch gears for a minute.
I love DSC, and I could listen to Michael talk for hours.
So Will wants to talk more about how DSC can be a platform that you can use as part of your career. Now, I know after speaking to Will at the MVP Summit last year, he was doing a lot of interesting stuff with DSC, like really pushed
crazy stuff with DSC.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to kind of hear more about what Michael was talking about with the policy enforcement. But yeah, I had one customer in particular. Their challenge, like I said, I've been doing a lot of the app modernization consulting. So I'm dealing with a lot of mixed mode environments where they're starting to adopt containerization of microservices, but they still need the monoliths in the environments. And they'll be running like Azure Kubernetes, which is very flexible and scalable, but the monoliths aren't so much so. So, I had been doing a lot of DSC configurations for enforcement, bringing up VMs, but also bootstrapping DSC configs into managed images, which I started offering a talk about because, basically doing a full automated implementation of standing up a VM, applying a DSC configuration, validating it, sysprepping it, and then stamping out a managed image. And the company wanted to be able to have that flexibility to deploy to, at the time it was 42 regions, but be able to deploy to all of the regions simultaneously. Interestingly enough, we ran into a couple of bottlenecks, but it had nothing to do with the DSC or stamping out managed images. What it was is they had very specific binaries that they needed installed. So we were doing it on Blob Store, which when you start scaling to multiple geos and pulling the trigger to build multiple images, Blob does not perform well without a CDN in front of it.
Wow.
So we had a ton of failures on that until we managed to get a CDN in front of it. But yeah, DSC is one of my favorite tools. I feel like beyond PowerShell, it's probably the next gateway drug to getting you into that development mindset and into that DevOps agile mentality. So I've been a huge proponent for a while.
So what are some best practices that you've found around actually implementing DSC?
Source control to begin with.
Yeah, source control is huge.
What are you, Stephen Morawski?
I was just thinking about him the other day. I wonder what he's up to these days. I need to pick his brain to find out what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
But so source control is definitely huge. But if you're getting into implementing DSC as kind of a practice for your data center or your cloud environment, we're all great with documentation, so I'm sure everybody's got runbooks on how to build their servers. But if you don't have those, starting out with the broad strokes and kind of whittling down, it's always an iterative approach. But going broad, okay, what does my general server image look like? Let's get those common settings down. And then start whittling it down from there. I'm a huge fan of composite configs. So breaking things out by role is hugely important. One of the interesting things that I found with working with previous customers is seeing how, we have this concept of a golden image. Every data center has one. And those have very specific configuration settings to be applied to every single machine. And it's amazing to see what comes out of the weeds as far as who's not actually following those practices. More so I had one customer where we had we did their golden image in a DSC config. Took about 5 days to do. They had a document. It was like 17 pages. It was huge. But we started applying it to the non-production environments, and SQL teams came back and they're like, our SQL server stopped responding in the test environments. So we're looking through it, and one of the settings that the customer had set was disabling things like NLA, network location awareness, and stuff like that, which apparently SQL needs to be able to talk. We went through and we were like, why are you disabling this? And they were like, well, it's a security practice that we disable it from our baseline. And we started asking questions as far as, found out from the SQL team, they filed like a deviation to be able to get this passed through so they didn't get audited all the time.
And that's an interesting point, because it allows teams to have a communication about a configuration. If you've got that as part of a Word document for your golden image, a Word document that's 17 pages is very difficult for you to kind of say, right, here's what it looks like. Here's how it repeatedly deploys. If you've got that as configuration as code with DSE, let's deploy it. Let's test it. Let's kill it. Let's deploy it, test it, kill it.
Very easy to start nailing it down. The thing that I found the most interesting, though, was, we through talking to the SQL teams, we found out that they were filing these deviations so they didn't get flagged. So we're like, okay, let's find out how many of the teams are actually filing these deviations. And come to find out that the only servers that didn't have the deviations were print servers. So something like 95% of the servers in the environment were filing. They were literally creating more paperwork for themselves with this one setting in their golden image. So stuff like that really starts coming out of the weeds, and you start stamping this stuff down. And it's all about, like you said, let's test it out, let's see what breaks, see where it goes, and then you can start parsing those things out, and then you start seeing your compliance numbers coming up. Obviously, the amount of paperwork starts coming down because you're not having to fill out flag requests or audit violation requests constantly. And it's a really good way to go. So, and then, like I said, it gets you into that, not just the development mentality, but the iterative mentality and communicating with other groups and starting to work with them to start bringing those things in line.
Yeah, not only that, if you've got an operational change that you need to make in code, you've got a much better scalability of doing so across your server estate than doing it manually. I had on another conversation with another Microsoft team earlier today. Apparently PowerShell doesn't scale. So I'll be having conversations with them in person at the MVP Summit because that's not quite right.
No. But I find when it comes to DevOps practices, technology adoption is usually not the problem. Everybody's really hip to adopting the tools, but more often than not, the challenges that I usually see for a customer.
Sorry, Slack.
Oh, yes, I Glenn, don't even want to get into those modules.
Glenn, that was my response.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yes.
Really, it doesn't come down to technology adoption. Oftentimes, the two biggest roadblocks I see in organizations that are trying to adopt it, number one, are culture. Everybody really hits those silo mentalities and doesn't really want to collaborate. It's very much still catch and toss. Architects are up on their high mountains, dropping their what they desire down on the lower masses, and they don't talk thereof after. But really, a lot of the challenges that I see comes down to really four buckets. You have technology, you have legal, you have process, and you have people roadblocks that you generally get. And more often than not, 95% of the first three, the ones that aren't people, are actually people problems.
Yes, I would agree with that. I've seen in my current role as a consultant that organizations that aren't adopting sort of DevOps practices, if you start talking to them about PowerShell just in general, they start going, "Oh, this isn't a GUI," and it's just a change in mentality more than anything else.
Well, and it goes even further beyond that. It's people can, don't get me wrong, people can be exceptionally brilliant in coming up with their own solutions, but they can also be a little bit territorial and maybe a little closed-minded. One of my favorite things that I like to talk about, I actually do a talk called The Challenge of Implementing DevOps in IT, and I had a very real conversation with somebody one time about, we were doing some designs for migrating their data center, and there was a Windows XP box in the middle of the data center, and we were like, what's this for? And it was a terminal that they used to walk up to it and turn the lights on and off in the data center. So when somebody came in, they'd click a button for the zone they were in, the lights would come on, they'd be on for about 30 minutes, and then, they'd turn off automatically. And it's like, why do we need this in the new data center? And they're like, well, that's how we get the lights operating. And I'm like, there's these magic boxes you can put on the wall. When people walk by them, the lights come on. But I think, the reason why I tell that story all the time is it goes back to that whole we've always done it that way mentality of not necessarily looking beyond and looking to see what other technologies can solve those challenges. So those are the two biggest pitfalls that I find with implementing DevOps today.
So Will, I'm curious. So for me, configuration management is basically three things. It's what do I have, what state is it in, and what's going to happen when I change it. And as you move to the cloud, what do I have gets easier and easier because you just query, AWS and Google Cloud and Azure and Rackspace and all the different providers that you're talking to and figure out what do I have, because it's not under somebody's desk. It's just an API away. And then what state is it in? That's like you've got integrated configuration management into your cloud services, so you can figure out what state things are in. But what's going to happen when I change it is like the top 0.01%. I mean, there's great tools like Test Kitchen that help a lot. But I mean, if you went to 100 companies right now and asked, what's going to happen when you change that server? It's almost an unfair question. Right? Like, especially if you're talking about patches, because they don't know what code is in the patches. But even if they're releasing their own code, what's going to happen whenever I release this code is like, well, we've got some really good testing, but still we're a little crossing our fingers. Like, it's a really hard place to get to.
But configuration management in DSC, on to that point, it gives you the ability to scale, and it gives you the ability to kind of follow that deploy and destroy model too, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to roll my patches out to test QA prod if I'm going configuration as code with the config management. If I can build a new instance fully patched and test and validate that. So
yeah, that's what I'm finding is the last part of that release pipeline mile is the part where you see the fewest. I mean, it's like any technology. The most sophisticated part is the fewest number of adoptions, right? But
yeah,
at least with a good test model, you can say whenever we do something that causes an outage, that we're not going to repeat it in the future. And obviously, for things that are more immutable and transactional, like just a web server that doesn't have any data on it. Like you said, you can put it in a test environment and fully prove out that, at least nothing we know about is going to break. But if it's a workload that has data on the box and it's not easily reproduced in a test environment, I just find very few people have actually have got to the point where they can reliably guarantee what's going to happen whenever I change. Like, that is the most difficult part of configuration management. What's going to happen when I change?
Yeah, I think that, you're right. Actually, the last conversation that usually takes place during implementations is like even integration testing. When you're talking about doing a fully automated environment, it's just never talked about. Did what I told it to do actually do the thing that I thought it was going to do? So that, and yeah, I'm probably pretty guilty about not doing integration testing too.
So just to go back to one of the questions that came up on YouTube from Aaron Nelson, he's asking, speaking about SQL and DSE, what's the difference between X SQL Server and SQL DSE modules? And and the simple answer is don't use the X SQL Server one. It's now technically deprecated.
Yeah.
X SQL Server was the wrong naming convention.
Yeah, it was the
I mean, I understand what was trying to be accomplished at the time. Like have a, maybe I don't understand that much, but I understand the idea. Like, oh, we're not like totally sure what, that we're ready to put these in production yet. So they start off with the experimental, and eventually we'll switch over. Should have just gone and then Markham preview, But
yeah, I remember those conversations.
Yeah.
I think looking at it back at this point, so we're in 2019. DSC's now been out properly for 5 years.
Yeah.
Or coming up 5 years. It was 2014 it came out with Server 2012 R2. And yeah, in the initial couple of years, it wasn't very well used. It wasn't very well adopted. Even internally at Microsoft, people didn't know that DSC existed because a lot of people didn't know PowerShell existed on Box still. So the growth of the community is what I think has allowed us to move away from this X model to what is now being seen as supportable by Microsoft modules, which is why we've got HQRM modules, which is high quality release modules for DSC.
Yeah, and for naming, what I managed to get done, I could take the word "did" out. I did manage to get done. It's just that naming and supportability docs that are out there now. So, like the name quality and supportability can just be independent of each other. So naming, like X is deprecated. Move towards either just put your resources in a module or make your module something DSC if you want to be super clear about it. But that's independent of support. Support goes in your README and it says, this is where support comes from for this module. And then like has nothing to do with the name. And then like basically that's it. I mean, once you get to the point where just like have a good standard pattern where I identify a new module and then I go look at the README and try to figure out, is it being actively maintained by whom? Like who's providing support? Is it supported? Is it community supported? And it is complicated. I think a lot of the complexity, and I'm sure you guys see this too, like people are still coming around the bend from like expecting every solution for Windows to be this fully supported turnkey thing versus going out and exploring what the community has created and becoming part of that momentum. I mean, like when we first introduced these concepts, it was like, what are you, crazy? Like that's not how we do things. And it seems like it's pretty commonplace now. Like that's just an expectation.
Well, part of it too, I think that's made things a little bit easier has been nomenclature change, getting away from words like beta or test or experimental and going into, it's not a beta, it's preview.
Right.
Makes it a lot easier to be able to adopt a lot of those technologies. I know, actually, one of the things that I recall about the PowerShell 5 release was you didn't just stop at preview, it was production preview, like getting the word out that it is going to be fully supported even in a production environment, even though it's not GA. And that's something that I'd actually like to see more often in the Azure ecosystem is, stuff that's, production preview, because it's a little bit easier for customers to be able to latch onto it. Yeah. I mean, oftentimes when I'm doing these implementations, it's like, I don't want to use that if it's in preview. And it's like everything's kind of experimental and you don't know if it's going to work anyway in your own environment. Why not just, add this tool in to make your lives a little bit easier? But I think kind of changing that nomenclature has made a lot more people open to being able to use those.
What do you guys find with that? Are more people able to put previews into production now? I'm like a really mixed answer on this.
I tend to find people are more willing to accept previews if it's coming from a product team that are very open and are delivering constant feedback back to those people that are in that preview. So especially in the Azure the Azure space, if you get in the private preview and then you get one-to-one conversations with the product team, even as non-MVPs, and then come into it to a preview, you've already got that history prior to it going live. And most of the time, things are only slightly changing from preview to GA.
Yeah.
yes, there's some expectations some exceptions to that rule where it's at preview and then it becomes GA and then fully supportable. But you've got some organizations that will just turn around and say, it's preview, we're not going to take that risk because they've previously been burnt on other preview software. But you then have some customers that will say, you know what, if we have to re-architect our solution because we're using a preview software and it doesn't go GA or GA features change, we'll hit that bridge when we come to it.
That makes sense.
From my perspective, it's really kind of interesting, the conversations you can have depending on what the architecture is. If you're looking at like lift and shift migrations, like monolithic server, going that whole traditional route, they almost seem to be a lot more closed than the people that are like experimenting and looking to modernize their applications, right? That mentality seems to be more like, well, we're already using all this new as a service stuff. Let's go ahead and get some preview monitoring. Or actually, I had a customer not too long ago. We were doing an environment and private DNS zones, which I think is currently still in preview. Was a big discussion, but it was like, hey, it meets our technical requirement and it's getting us where we need to go. Let's go ahead and go forward with it. Whereas a lot of the traditional infrastructure guys, if I talk to them about private DNS zone preview, oh yeah, no, they're building. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy that I see between the two sides.
I'd say, to add to that, if it's an organization that's currently going through more modernization and change within the org, so they're taking on the process of going from, say, Server 2008 and 2012 to 2019, you've got more developers in the org that are willing to break things and fix them quicker. So they've got a better chance of going through that cycle of pain, but they're more willing to do so.
I agree. I think, I'm sorry. I think we're getting some audio issues from Jonathan.
No, actually, I think it's coming from Michael. He froze.
Oh, okay.
Internet.
What were you trying to say, Michael?
Sorry, I was just expressing agreement.
So one question I have for you, Will, is when you're implementing DSC, do you find more often you're using a push model or a pull model?
I'm almost always going pull.
Okay.
And I shill Azure automation DSC as much as I can. Primarily because the reporting is fantastic. Everything is secure connection. It's really, really hard to get a security guy to disagree with me as far as the level of security that goes behind it. But it's a good raw way to go to get them started into configuration management and not necessarily have to pull in any third-party tooling. I'm also a big preacher of, coding native to the platform. So DSC goes a long way, especially for the Windows ecosystem for that. And then, leveraging tools that can import that native code and then deploy it. That's kind of always the route that I've taken.
Now, if you were in a situation where you couldn't use Azure as your pull server, what have you used for that? Is Tug still a thing? I know that was like an open source project to try and make a decent pull server because we never really got something great from Microsoft on that.
I would love to have a good open source pull server.
I've worked a little bit with Tug. I was actually going to ask Michael, how do you pronounce Trek?
Trek. Yeah.
Trek.
I loved that project too, and Mark Gray originally wrote it. And if it went the rest of the way, it would work perfectly in Kubernetes. Like that's what he had in mind when he wrote it. So this is a Node.js implementation of the pull server protocol. Cool concept. Like everything was a microservice, like reporting microservice and a artifact microservice down the line. It's just like none of them have really gotten any momentum going to make it a full-fledged solution.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of been I actually haven't seen any pull requests for Trek in a long time.
No.
Same thing with Tug, I think. So I wouldn't say.
So we shipped. I was going to say in Server 2019, we shipped support for SQL as the backend database for the Windows pull server, and the performance improvements for the eCent database implementation. But I was pushing really hard because I felt like we had originally promised like a certain set of things that should work, and one of those was scalability. And the core functionality that we said should be there was there, but the scalability was a miss. The implementation on top of those existing database formats just didn't work. So making it something that could be put behind a load balancer and talk to a common database or database cluster said, okay, now we've got scalability. Now we've delivered what we said we were going to deliver. And the main focus ever since then has been on the service. So I was going to ask how much you guys are seeing DSC for Linux. All of a sudden, in the last few months, there's been this renewed interest in DSC for Linux. I don't know exactly where it's coming from. I've heard of a few people saying that like they're the ones promoting it, which would be cool. So I just figured this out together with Eamon O'Reilly, I guess last summer-ish, that there's only, just for background, DSC for Linux, right? Requires you go install OMI and then like download the bits and install the agent. And there's only like a dozen or so built-in resources. They're written in C. Like that's why there's no community around this. Nobody's going to go write resources in C, right? So he figured out you could actually use the NX script resource, which for Windows, everybody frowns on the script resource because why not just make it a whole custom resource and do proper testing and things like that.
I don't know what's wrong with the resource of shame, but okay.
So with NX script, because it's running on Linux, you can shebang the first line and call out your language. So with NX script, you've got get, set, and test as just your parameters are what code you want to run. Well, if you shebang to PowerShell core or Go or Python or whatever you want, then those can be in whatever language you prefer. And then you wrap that in a composite. So you're no longer accepting arbitrary code as parameters. You've got a nice set of parameters that are just feeding a composite that are feeding NX script. And that allows you to use PowerShell core with DSC on Linux right now. And I've seen people figuring this out. And I think Eamon might have put a blog post or at least some Twitter stuff about it. And then all of a sudden I see all this new Linux activity for DSC. And I'm like, I haven't heard anything about DSC for Linux in a while, and now all of a sudden it's going crazy. What's going on? But it's great. I mean, that model works.
Yeah, it's cool. It's interesting. I actually wouldn't mind taking a look at a couple of those examples, so I'm going to jot that down. So I've got a couple hours of plane riding to do so tomorrow. But yeah, from my perspective, honestly, getting what I've really, really been surprised about is people and their interest in PowerShell for Mac and Linux. Not so much with the DSC stuff, but a lot of people are talking about PowerShell on Linux. And I was, when the announcement first came out, PowerShell is open sourced, available on Linux. Once again, dealing with a lot of old infrastructure guys, but they were hugging their laptops with Ubuntu installed on it, going over my dead body. But now it's really surprising to see how much it's taken off.
Yeah, I mean it's the community. I really think the community is both for PowerShell and for DSC, but tenfold for PowerShell, right? I mean PowerShell community is just insane. It's awesome.
So as you're building what DSC is going to become, is cross-platform something that you're thinking about, or are you already implementing?
It's fully implemented.
Okay.
It's not, so whenever in Azure, whenever you're talking about I'm going to go build something new, it's never a discussion point. Like Like it used to be like, oh, we're going to build this for Windows, and then like maybe we'll hire a contractor, and somebody's going to do something on Linux or whatever. And now it's just like, of course you're going to do it cross-plat. I think it's just like that. That's the assumption whenever you start a new project, and I think it's just like whenever your core business is cloud, you don't get to pick what people are going to run on the cloud, right? You just welcome them with open arms and empower them with whatever they need to be successful. You kind of get yourself out of the way. So it's never even a discussion whether or not something will be cross-plat. It's just an assumption.
So I have to ask you, are you seeing more of an interest in DSC for containers? I've been asked once or twice, but it was kind of just more of a theoretical.
Yeah, that's what I see too. Like for the host, yes.
Yeah.
Depending on the platform, like some platforms have native configuration management, like Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. But if it's something like a Windows container host, then definitely. But inside the container, I really like. There was a long time where it was talked about frequently. People were trying to do experiment, but I think that configuration is just you express it like in your Docker file, and then that becomes your end deliverable.
I've had a couple of people ask me, usually when I'm giving Azure DSC demonstrations, can we apply this to the containers? And usually where it dies off is I'll ask them, well, what kind of a use case are you thinking of? And then it's just kind of, after that. But, I was just wondering from the Microsoft perspective if there was any customer interest or actual use cases.
Not inside of containers. Not What I am interested in is, what does it look like to audit what's happening inside of containers? What does it look like to, do some more sophisticated reporting there? But even then, you should be able to track that down in your pipeline versus having to audit the end result. It doesn't hurt, to go poke at the end result and make sure that you got what you thought you were going to get. But you should be able to get those results by looking at your code.
I think the sort of understanding with using DSC for containers was you'd start building up your Docker file for your container image, and then you'd apply a DSC configuration and then take a container image from that configuration. And then you'd start at that layer.
Yeah,
so
you
that
could.
Layering up. That was, I think, what was kind of what was being talked about for quite a while.
Yeah.
Aaron Nelson,
like people who have the skill set.
Aaron Nelson just posted on YouTube, can I build a bunch of SQL containers and then apply DSC to them? I can't imagine how much you like torturing yourself.
That might not be the way I'd express it well. You can. There's nothing stopping you doing so, but it's not really the way that you would expect to be using it.
Yeah. I do know that they've made some inroads with SQL in containers. Primarily, I remember there were some performance issues with I want to say it was like premium storage with SQL in a container just did not seem to play nice. Something to that effect. But I don't know. Could you apply the DSC configuration to SQL sitting inside of a container?
You could.
There's no reason why you can't.
Yeah.
You just then have DSC running.
Yeah, it doesn't go through the LCM.
It's good to just ask the questions and go experiment, because some of the coolest ideas come out of like, this doesn't seem like something we're going to do in production, but we'll go try it and just see what happens. And you learn something new and then you apply it in some completely different area. So.
Yeah.
I have a Summit question.
Which Summit, Michael?
It's Summit and Conf. We should do for both. So with all the streaming, all the Twitch streaming going on, are you thinking at all about streaming the demos, like the what do we call them, the lightning talks? It's just more things for you to worry about.
I thought there was some restriction about streaming from the event. I thought I remembered reading that.
Well, which event are we talking about?
The Summit?
Start with PowerShell Summit.
So, yeah, for Summit, we are partnered with a third party for producing the content and posting it on YouTube. We have no plans to do any live streaming this year. That would actually be kind of an interesting conversation to have, though, especially with like the Iron Scripter event.
Oh,
so yeah.
The only if you had people take it on individually and just kind of like say like, well, we're not gonna make it part of the summit, but if you want to live stream your demos, go for it, because you're not really streaming the session, you're just streaming your desktop or whatever. And then maybe I guess we could have some, like the day before, have an hour set aside where we all hackathon and make sure everybody understands how to use like Open Broadcast Studio and things like that. But
yeah, and so we're not diametrically opposed to streaming. Where it was where there was a complication is that if we can talk to make sure that the person doing the presenting as well as us, we're all on board and in agreement. We're totally open to that. Part of the reason why we had the streaming kind of blurbs and like the speaker submissions and the ticket stuff is we had a couple of people that were streaming stuff that was outside of like they were streaming the sessions on their own channels during the talks, and that kind of raised a few eyebrows. So we kind of had to put that in there, but we're not necessarily completely closed off to it. It's just we kind of have to talk about the logistics.
From another logistics point, one of the main reasons why live streaming hasn't happened in the past is the US summit has always respected the EU summit is not that far afterwards. So you tend to have your sessions, and then occasionally you would have a speaker that would come to the US and then come to EU summit. They may be doing the same session, but having that then live, like up on YouTube at the week of PSConf EU, makes it difficult for the EU organizers to pick a schedule if they know that's happening. And there's always been a good community feel with you guys waiting until the EU is finished before you post things.
Yeah, and it kind of helps that production lead times kind of take a little bit to get everything done. So typically, like with our video AV vendor, they don't like just produce one of the videos and then upload it. They get them all done out in bulk. We'll review them and then up they go. So it takes a little bit of time to get, what is it, 100 and some odd hours of content taken care of.
Wow.
So, but yeah, I could see the live streaming. Well, maybe not necessarily for the lightning demos. That might not be a problem. I think that's probably a conversation that the three of us would have to kind of take offline and chat about. But sure. Yeah.
I don't know how many people that are there are like already doing streaming, if their laptops are even set up for it or not. It's not something where you think about like 15 minutes before, hey, maybe we should stream this. It looks like it, but you want to put a little work into getting set up so that it's not like what you're thinking about while you're trying to stream.
Yeah. We did have one instance last year and, had to have a discussion with somebody, but, I think it's getting to be a little bit easier, especially with the quality of phones and everything. Not quite the 4K quality of paying somebody, many thousands of dollars to do the video production, but it's still.
Yeah, we should clarify the terminology too for people who are listening in that might not be familiar with it. So there's streaming like what we're doing now, where you're streaming, a camera and a view. And then there's this Twitch streaming, which is using a platform that's really for video games. To stream someone's desktop as they're writing code, and there's usually like some restriction-free music playing in the background that's like Creative Commons licensed, and then like there's all of these plugins, so you can like enrich the chat window, and you can even give people control over some things, and like you can do text to speech, so you've got closed caption text on the screen, and like all of these things. There's virtual green screens. You see this? So you can have your webcam. It just figures out what's behind you and that's not changing, and it just makes that the original picture. So it's just you. It's like the weatherman, where it's just your body in front of a map, but it's just you in your office, with like no actual green screen, and it works I was about to say really well. Let's say reasonably well.
Yeah, it's it's like 90s green screen technology.
Yeah.
But it's getting there. But
it's cool. I used to question, like, with my son, you're just watching YouTube of other kids playing video games. What are you doing? And now I'm on my phone watching people write code all the time. Like, what happened?
So does Twitch actually allow you to do that? Because I always figured, like, doing it to YouTube would be pretty easy, but Twitch was, for a little while, was a little bit kind of crazy about their terms of service and what you're using it for.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of hunting, and it seems like their focus is gaming.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, like, if you, this is probably like a weird gray area for them.
Yeah, it would definitely be an interesting legal area to have a more in-depth look into.
Yeah.
Especially
like,
since, you're not videotaping or streaming. Videotaping, jeez. You're not streaming like, I don't know, like something that's non-technical. You're not streaming, people playing football or something. You're streaming writing code from a computer where they also play their games. Like, you're not playing a game, but you are problem solving and thinking strategically and interacting with the community. Like, it's such a good fit.
So there's just been some comments put into the YouTube. So yeah, it looks like Twitch just changed their terms of services not that long ago to add science technology as a genre.
Oh, cool.
As a game, as Mark's put it.
Well, it's certainly,
that's cool.
According to my Twitter feed, is becoming very popular.
If you haven't tried this out, so there's PowerShell Live. It's using an Azure function to go catch anybody whose alias is on a list that says, like, yeah, I'm going to mostly be streaming me writing PowerShell. And then it just tweets out an announcement every time they go live, or if they're planning to go live.
Yeah. That's cool.
And it is cool unless you're, like, sitting at a restaurant at dinner with your family and your phone chirps. And you're like, but I really want to see what he's going to do.
Yeah, it's never a good time for me when that happens. It's just...
And I have a couple of times had people, like, I was just, I need to knock out a quick DSC resource. I'll go ahead and stream this. And I've had people in the chat room be like, hey, man, like, you might want to look at line 10. Oh, yeah, thanks.
I remember a couple of years ago, Thomas Rayner and I were talking about how it might be interesting to just, like, do a live stream regular cast of, like, just taking, like, people's different little challenges and trying to solve them by PowerShell online. But it obviously went nowhere. But yeah, it was always kind of an interesting idea.
Well, the time may be right.
Yeah, right. Might be the next Fortnite.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do think there's an audience now, based on what I'm seeing. I don't know if it'll last. I don't know if it'll grow, but I think it's very interesting.
Here's what I think is different. Whenever you're recording a demo, you spend a lot of time getting it perfect. But when you're live streaming, you're going to show everyone how often you make mistakes, and that's normal, and that's how everybody works.
And just how bad your spelling is.
And just how bad, yeah, exactly.
How much do I really depend on autocomplete?
Well, and coding styles. Like, if you're doing a demo, you might make it look really formal, like you're really following this perfect process. And then when you're live streaming, you're just hammering stuff out and trying it, and it fails, and trying it. I mean, it's just it's the way everybody works, but it's so great to learn by watching somebody and go, oh, I'm not the only one that has horrible habits. I don't know. I think it's cool.
Michael Lombardi, maybe we can use this to kill the whole not a developer engineer thing.
So I just want to bring something up about that. Everybody who does anything with a computer, you are a programmer, one way or another. Even if you are clicking GUIs, you are a programmer. You're telling a computer to do something. You're programming it. It's maybe not in the technical term that we're used to using, but actually from a language term, that's what is happening under the hood.
So you want to know where I usually kill the argument at, because I'll hear the same thing. Oh, I'm not a developer. It's like, did you ever write anything in VB script? Well, yeah, okay, that's more developer than PowerShell is. Go away. And yeah.
Well, I think we should probably wrap things up here. But I do want to give everybody an opportunity to, let us know, like Michael, I know you've got a blog post that's coming out soon on the state of DSC. Will, I want to make sure that people know how they can get a hold of you, all that sort of thing. So, Michael, do you want to go first?
Yeah, the best place to keep track of me is on Twitter. So Greene, Migreene. And definitely feel free to DM me on there as well. And then, Slack just as well, PowerShell Slack, any of the Slack channels that you'll find the PowerShell community in, I'm usually there as well. Even if I'm not active, I'll come when called. So if you DM me there. The PowerShell blog is where I usually release content. I'm overdue right now, but hopefully within the next week or two, I'll get something there. And then I have sessions both at PSConf North America and, PowerShell and DevOps Summit North America and PSConf EU. So looking forward. I love them both. I love being part of that community and participating in it. So really, really looking forward to those events this year.
I will see you there. Okay, well.
Awesome.
So you'll be able to see me, find me over at the PowerShell and DevOps Global Summit if you're attending. As far as online, Gamer Living Will is pretty much the ID for everything. So GitHub, Twitter, LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, feel free to drop me a line, and you can also catch me occasionally in the PowerShell.org forums. Nowadays, I'm more on the website assistance forums, but drop a question in the Q&A, and we'll see what happens.
So, Ryan, is there anything we still have to cover? I know that Aaron Nelson wanted us to mention something, but I didn't get a chance to actually look at what it was.
So, just a few little things in kind of news. Obviously, 6.1.3 was just recently released. Of PowerShell Core. So if you're not using that already, go and download it and go and have a play. It's on my to-do list after this because my machine needed to get a reboot earlier. That's one of the main ones. And then the DSE resource kit, that's just been recently released with some new fixes. So go and have a look at what's gone on there. There's been a lot of change happening. There's a lot of other things coming along with PowerShell, and especially the experimental features that are coming in 6.2, which is on preview 4 at the moment. One of my favorite features of that is the experimental tab completion, which allows you to do so for example, disable network adapter. That's D-NA tab complete, and that's it. That's going to change how you work in PowerShell.
That's true. That is cool.
Especially for somebody who does it for more interactive work than scripting. It's very much an interactive tool, and it actually does work in VS Code as well. So you can start typing D-NA and then tab complete.
Wow.
So Aaron Nelson.
In other words, you don't have to have like the entire verb. You can just sort of get close.
Yeah. You don't even, you lead those 3 letters, D-NA, tab complete, and that's disable network adapter.
Wow.
So Aaron Nelson, who is SQL Variant on Twitter, wants us to know that there is a new release of the SQL Server PowerShell module that includes some new data classification commandlets. So if you are a SQL DBA, that's definitely something that you're going to check out.
I just want to say thank you guys for bringing this podcast back. I know it takes a ton of time. Definitely. I mean, whenever it stops being a weekly thing, it was like, this is what I did. When it was recording, I'd go get in the chat room and listen, or if I missed it because I was traveling, I'd listen to it on the plane. I mean, I've always loved hearing this, so it's really awesome that it's back.
Well, that's mainly thanks to Ryan, honestly.
It's actually thanks to the people in the PowerShell Slack who said, "Can we get it?" And I went, "Well, you know what? I can do something about this. Let me do it." You know, so yeah. And as I put in the YouTube channel and in the Slack channel prior, if there's anything you want to talk about, please submit the form so that we can get you put in. We're currently looking at doing it monthly, just so that everybody can manage, but that might turn into weekly at some point in future. We're not saying yes yet, because we're all getting back into the process of this. And for people like me, it's 3:30 UK time.
Wow. Good golly.
And if anybody's wondering, we are expecting Hal to be back next month. He's not here tonight because he's in Disney with his family this week. So that's why Hal's not here.
No excuses.
One thing I will say on sort of like the evolution of the scripting podcast going forward is we might end up doing an EU time zone as well.
Cool.
Dependent on people that get involved.
That seems fair.
Yeah.
Because we've got a huge community over here, and I know that you know, not everybody wants to be up at 2 a.m., but a lot of people have stuff that they want to talk about. So that's something that's potentially coming in future.
Fantastic.
We'll just listen to it on the way to work.
Yeah, that would be about the right time for you. and for people like Gail, who's over in Malaysia at the moment, it'd be going home from work.
I think it's Friday for him. Like it might be Saturday morning already. I'm not sure how time zones work.
Things, clocks. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys, for having me on here. It was good, fun time.
Yeah, it was finally, and it's good to finally have you on here. I'm
definitely going to connect to you, Ryan, and you, Michael, about some of the streaming stuff.
Awesome.
All right. Good night, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
In-person conversation at MVP Summit.
Oh, yeah, that's in a couple weeks. I forgot.
I'm looking forward to it.
Same here. All right. Thank you very much. You guys have a great one.
Good night.
Good night.